We're going to move on. The BAFTAs last night, you may or may not have watched it, but Kate Winslet, the actress, had some very emotional words in her acceptance speech. Let's have a listen.
I Am Ruth was made for parents and their children, for families who feel that they are held hostage by the perils of the online world, for parents who wish they could still communicate with their teenagers but who no longer can, and for young people who have become addicted to social media and its darker sides. This does not need to be your life. To people in power and to people who can make change, please criminalize harmful content. Please eradicate harmful content. We don't want it. We want our children back.
What did you make of the speech? We'll talk about the online safety bill in a moment, but what did you make of that speech?
Well, I just seen it for the first time. I was very impressed. I mean, what a powerful statement. And I recognise everything she's saying. As the parent of children entering their teens, I'm extremely concerned about what the online world means for them. I think it's absolutely right that we think, as the government is doing, how do we ensure that the standards we expect of each other in the real world apply online as well? How do we extend the principles of a civilised and decent law-governed society to the internet? That's an enormous challenge, but the principle is absolutely right, and we do need essentially to rescue our society from technology. As we move forward, as we harvest all the benefits that tech brings, we have to remember who it's all about, which is human beings, and at the moment I don't think we're getting the balance right.
Shall
So I agree with all of that, but it's a particular challenge, if I may say so, and if you have time to adjust your speech for this afternoon, it's a particular challenge for national Conservatives, because of course big tech, like climate catastrophe, is international, it is global. And so you need ultimately international solutions to address this. These people are paying no tax. They are the new imperium. They fly under logos instead of flags. And we can argue about who's got the vote. They don't care who's got the vote. They are rich enough and big enough to buy and sell politicians and turn our deputy prime minister into their head of PR. And we've got to deal with this at an international level, at a treaty level, ultimately, whatever our squabbles here on this little island.
But in the meantime, do you recognise the distress there of Kate Winslet? You know, parents losing their children to social media, families being sort of ripped apart, really, by it.
I don't actually think it's just about children. I actually think a lot of politicians are completely addicted to social media, and not in a good way. I actually think that you look back to the Brexit referendum, the role of Cambridge Analytica, it's all part of the same thing. I think the debate about artificial intelligence now, I think we're already moving into the next phase of this, which is, I find that genuinely quite terrifying, because I think with social media, I completely agree with Shami. This is something where I write a lot in the book about Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad, William Rees-Mogg, who wrote this incredible book back in 1997 called The Sovereign Individual. And it's all about how do the people of wealth and power get themselves even further out of the clutches of democratic and economic control set by others. And I think these guys, they call themselves anarcho-capitalists. People like Musk, they're trying to get away from any sort of democratic control.
That sounds slightly conspiratorial, right?
Well, they're very open about it.
Sure, but every conspiracist thinks the conspiracy is happening. That's what makes them a
But they admit it. I mean,
but they admit it. It's not a conspiracy, it's in plain view.
Peter Thiel is one man who is a comic book villain, I'll concede you that. But
William
the general
is a
idea...
very, very clever guy who wrote a book that I think is a Bible for these guys.
Lots of people, lots of clever men write books.
And lots of politicians are vulnerable to being courted, whether it is by media moguls like Murdoch or whether it is like AI. Everyone is vulnerable to that. In terms of how we protect our children, do you think it is a salient, as Kate Winslet is saying?
Look, I am somebody who is furious that Elon Musk has not killed Twitter yet, because I can't leave it, but I really do want to be free of it. So I think that the speech is good and it is important, and I think, you know, for me, I was in the generation that's kind of just about grew up before the internet and then had the internet, and I think that it would be completely different if I'd had access to a mobile phone from when I was 12 or whenever. Yeah. But ultimately, I think what that speech kind of missed is that the government can't do everything. The internet is fundamentally a relatively lawless place. You do need to just, as parents, restrict, take the phone away, don't buy them one. Be much more on it about how you do. No, I know. But
and they get alienated at school.
Yes, I know. Yeah, it's really hard, and this is a big cultural change. You'll have to band together with other parents, run it through school, run it through the school, right? Get the school to do it. But if you don't do that...
Well, that's why he's Conservative Home. I mean, he's been very interesting. And by the way, I'm sorry for getting your name wrong earlier. You're right, there is a role for parents, but there is also a role for government.
I didn't dispute
and for governance. And I do think that this is like a new continent, and there will have to be a rule of law. It'll take a bit of time.
Then they're going to take it to space.
But in the end, we're going to... Yeah, they're so rich. They want to go off to space and leave us on the burning planet, having messed it up. So we have to take back control.
Is the government limited in what it can do then?
To a degree, yes, because we're talking about mobile global companies, as Shami says. I mean, that's not to say that the national governments can't, and I agree about the importance of doing things bilaterally or multilaterally through treaties. But fundamentally, governments can dictate what is practiced in their own jurisdiction, and they should absolutely be restricting, as we are doing through the Online Safety Bill.
Although it's taken so long.
Well, it's very difficult to get this right, but what we are doing is imposing criminal penalties on the directors of companies, of tech companies, that put harmful content out. So it's not just some kind of corporate malfeasance. The people who are responsible for corrupting children should be responsible for it. So there's a very real-world plan that is possible to implement.
But it's not just children, is it? It's influencing elections. It's fake news to the point that you can
Technology requires serious regulation. I do not dispute
greatly
that.
diminishing the reputations of professions such as barristers and academics.
Although
well, I mean, not that,
the bill was developed, wasn't it, in part in response after the suicide of Molly Russell. That was the sort of impetus for it, and yet we don't yet have it on the statute book. How far do you think a national government can go in terms of trying to either limit or criminalise the publishers of this stuff?
They can go so far, but they can go so far, but they can't do what's really required. And just as we had treaties in 1945, we need some new treaties to deal with this new continent. I think Alistair mentioned AI. We need a right to a human decision about certain things that are very important to our lives.
Except the government's very keen, of course, to make the UK a centre for investment in AI.
Sure.
You wouldn't disagree with that?
No, not at all. But I think there has to be an understanding of what it's doing, because I think that even the people who define themselves as experts, I'm not sure they really understand where this thing's going.
Well, they've said
some of them are very alarmed. Some of them are very, very alarmed.
There are other things the government could do as well. So, for example, they could legislate to guarantee what's called user-to-user connection, which means that currently, if you sign up to something like TikTok or Twitter, you don't actually have a right to see the people that you've subscribed to and follow, because those will swap out for sponsored content that you haven't followed, and it undermines the system. So they could just say, if you're subscribed to someone, you're guaranteed to hear them. It would undermine the business model, but it would hinder promotion of fake news.
That's all we have time for from all of us here. Thank you to my guests. Bye-bye.